The culture covered it with chocolate eggs and family brunches. The modern calendar buried it under brunch reservations and pastel decorations. But something else has been operating beneath the layer of cultural observance. Something that every serious esoteric tradition, every mystery school from Egypt to Greece, every alchemical text preserved through the Renaissance, every civilization that mapped the movement of heaven and earth, recognized and marked with deliberate precision. A threshold, not a commemoration of something that happened once. A living portal that opens in the same astronomical window every year, and that offers to anyone who knows what to do inside it something that no New Year's resolution, no January 1st promise, no productivity system has ever been able to deliver. A genuine, structurally supported opportunity to become someone different. Every culture has a point on the calendar they've designated as the moment of new beginnings. December 31st, January 1st. The secular New Year is arbitrary, a Roman administrative decision that has nothing to do with the movement of the sky. Meanwhile, the traditions that actually tracked cosmological conditions, the Hebrew calendar, the pre-Christian spring observances, the Egyptian ritual cycle, the Hermetic schools of the Renaissance, all converged on a different point as the true threshold. Not a date chosen by committee, a date the sky itself determines. And that date, calculated differently every year, arriving when the celestial conditions actually align, is what you are inside right now. Here is a fact about Easter that most people have never paused to consider. It has no fixed position on the calendar. You cannot look at a perpetual calendar and find Easter on the same date every year. The reason is that Easter is calculated astronomically. It falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon, following the vernal equinox. This means the date shifts every year because it is responding to the sky. The full moon, the equinox, the balance point of light and dark. A date that floats through March and April, anchored not to human administrative convenience, but to the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the axis of the earth. Before we go deeper into what this portal actually does and how to use it, if this kind of knowledge speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. This is where we keep uncovering what's hidden beneath the surface. When a date is determined by the sky rather than by a fixed calendar position, it carries a qualitatively different character. Human calendar dates are administrative. They mark anniversaries, fiscal periods, cultural conventions. Cosmologically determined dates are something else entirely. They arrive when specific conditions in the larger system are present. Easter arrives when the equinox has balanced light and dark, and the full moon is shining at maximum illumination. These are not symbolic ornaments on top of a cultural date. They are the structural conditions of the portal itself. The reason every tradition that tracked them treated this threshold as something qualitatively different from any other moment in the year. Think about what happens on Easter weekend at the level of collective attention. Hundreds of millions of people across dozens of countries, dozens of traditions, dozens of languages, enter a period of shared contemplation simultaneously. In some cases, that contemplation is focused on grief and loss. In others, on mystery and faith. In others, on family, on gathering, on ritual meals. The specific content of the contemplation varies, but the simultaneity does not. From the Hermetic perspective, specifically from the law of correspondence, which teaches that what occurs at one scale of reality is reflected at every other scale. A field of that magnitude, concentrated on death and resurrection simultaneously, is not neutral. It is active. One clarification before we go further, because this is the point where the content either lands or gets dismissed. What we are describing is not a religious claim. It is a structural one. The traditions that preserved the understanding of this threshold, from the Egyptian mystery schools to the Hermetic academies of Alexandria to the Jewish sages to the early alchemists, were not creating religious doctrine when they mapped this portal. They were documenting a recurring cosmological event and its observable effects on consciousness and energy. The religious traditions that later encoded this understanding used the theological language of their time to point to something the initiates had been working with for centuries. The portal is older than any of those religions. Consider for a moment the specific timing of you finding this video. Not last week, when preparation would have been more available. Not tomorrow, when the astronomical window will have begun to narrow. Today, the specific day the threshold is activated. There is a framework in the Hermetic tradition called the principle of correspondence that offers one interpretation of this kind of timing: as above, so below; as within, so without. And while this is not the place to treat that principle as proof of anything, it is worth sitting with the question: what does it mean that you are watching this on the specific day it matters to watch it? That is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a genuine question worth asking before moving forward. The Hebrew tradition preserves one of the oldest encodings of this threshold. Passover, Pesach, is not simply a historical commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. The deeper structure of the Passover observance, as the mystical traditions within Judaism read it, is a cosmic template, the transition from one state of being to another. Egypt, in the esoteric reading of the text, is not only a geography. It is a condition, a state of consciousness in which the person is enslaved to patterns, compulsions, identities that do not serve them. The passage through the threshold, marked by the lamb, the door, the night of the crossing, is the moment the old condition ends and the new one begins. The tradition preserved this as an annual event, not because the historical event recurs, because the portal does. The Passover instruction for the night of the crossing is precise in a way that carries weight. Eat standing up, sandals on your feet, staff in your hand, ready. Not the posture of someone commemorating something from the distant past. The posture of someone who understands they are at a threshold right now, that they are about to leave something behind, that on the other side of this night is a version of their life that the enslaved version never could have reached. The sandals are on because the next thing that happens is you move, not someday, not once you have decided completely, now, in this moment, through the door that is open. If the timing of finding this today is landing as more than coincidence, write in the comments right now, I entered the portal. Not as a spiritual performance, as a timestamp. You are inside this window. Record that you were here. The pre-Christian spring traditions carry the same structural template. The festivals associated with the spring threshold in Germanic and Scandinavian traditions, documented by scholars, including the Venerable Bede, who noted the month was named for a figure associated with dawn and new beginnings, centered on renewal, the return of warmth after cold, the return of growth after dormancy, the hatching of new life from the sealed egg. Eggs appear in the Passover Seder. Eggs appear in the spring festivals. Eggs appear in the Easter basket. This is not cultural borrowing in every case. It is independent convergence, multiple traditions, tracking the same cosmological event, arriving at the same symbol. Life encoded in a sealed form, waiting for the moment to open. The Christian tradition adds the most explicit version of the template, and the one that has given this day its name in most of the English-speaking world. 3 days. Friday, death. Saturday, the tomb. Sunday, emergence. The 3-day structure was not invented for the gospel narrative. It appears before it. In the book of Jonah, 3 days in the belly of the whale before the threshold. In the initiation rites of the Pythagorean school at Croton, candidates spent structured days in preparation, in the threshold space, before being admitted to the next stage of understanding. In the Egyptian passage, rites documented by scholars of the mystery tradition. The writers working within the early tradition were encoding a template the initiatory schools had already preserved for centuries before them. Here is what makes the convergence of these traditions significant. They did not speak to each other during the periods when their foundational frameworks were being developed. The Hebrew sages and the Pythagoreans and the Egyptian priests and the pre-Christian spring observers did not share manuscripts. They did not attend each other's mystery schools. They arrived at the same template, a period of severance, a threshold period of holding, an emergence on the other side, independently. In the Hermetic understanding, this kind of convergence is not coincidence. Multiple independent witnesses observing the same phenomenon are not copying each other. They are each reading the same text. And the text is the sky, the season, and the conditions of consciousness that the spring threshold produces. The Hermetic tradition provides the theoretical framework for understanding why this convergence occurs. The second of the 7 principles in the Kybalion, the law of correspondence, expressed in the teaching, as above, so below, as below, so above, describes the relationship between different scales of reality as structural rather than symbolic. The cosmological event of the equinox, the precise balance of light and dark, corresponds to a potential balance point in consciousness. The full moon that follows maximum illumination corresponds to maximum receptivity. These are not analogies in the literary sense. They are, in the Hermetic reading, structural correspondences, the macrocosm creating conditions that are reflected at the level of individual consciousness, available to be worked with by those who recognize them. Walk outside today and look at the trees. In the Northern Hemisphere, April is the month when what appeared dead is demonstrably alive. The branches that were bare in February are pushing new growth through every node. The soil that was frozen is softening, becoming hospitable to new roots. The birds are building nests that will hold eggs that will crack open into new life. This is not metaphor. This is biology responding to the same astronomical conditions, lengthening light, warming temperature, that the esoteric traditions mapped. The natural world is not doing something separate from what the portal does. It is doing the same thing at the physical level that the tradition says the portal does at the level of consciousness. The earth is demonstrating the principle in matter today. If what we're uncovering here is shifting how you see this day, let me know by liking this video. It helps more people find this content at exactly the right moment. Consider the difference between 2 people sitting in an Easter service this morning. On the surface, they are doing the same thing, same location, same words being spoken, same music, same ritual. But internally, they are in completely different relationships to what is happening. The first is commemorating, observing a historical event, participating in a cultural tradition, experiencing the warmth of community and continuity. This is a legitimate and real form of engagement. The second is participating, using the specific conditions of this threshold, aligning internally with the pattern the tradition preserved, making deliberate use of the portal that has opened. The Hermetic schools named this distinction clearly. One is the uninitiated response, the other is the initiate's response. The difference is not belief. It is awareness of what the conditions offer and the deliberate choice to use them. Something in you already knows which of those 2 responses you are here for. Otherwise, you would not still be watching. The person who engages with Easter as commemoration finds this kind of content mildly interesting and eventually returns to the plans already made for the afternoon. The person who recognizes the portal for what it is stays until the end, because what comes next, what the tradition specifically preserved for those who arrived at this threshold with this understanding, is something that has been tested across centuries. not because of magical thinking, because of alignment, because the conditions of this day, used deliberately, create a specific quality of momentum that the tradition understood as structurally different from any other starting point on the calendar. The Hermetic teaching that underlies the entire Easter template can be stated in three forces: death, resurrection, and ascension. These are the operating principles of the portal, not theological concepts belonging to one tradition. Operational descriptions of three phases that every mystery school, every serious esoteric framework, and every tradition that mapped this threshold recognized as the stages of genuine transformation. Understanding what each of these forces actually means, not metaphorically, not theologically, but in terms of what they ask of you on this specific day, is what separates the person who uses this portal from the person who passes through it without touching it. What does it mean on a practical level that this threshold involves the force of death, not physical death, not the vague, soft-edged request to let go of what no longer serves you that populates most modern spiritual content? The tradition is more specific and more demanding than that. Death, in the operational sense of the portal, means the precise, deliberate, acknowledged end of a version of yourself, a specific belief structure that has organized how you understand your limitations, an identity pattern. I am someone who always falls short at the crucial moment. I am someone who cannot maintain what I build. I am someone for whom this level does not work. That has been running in your internal system long enough to have shaped your external reality. Something named, not something vaguely waved at. Most people want to skip this step. The enthusiasm for resurrection is real. Everyone wants the new version. Everyone wants the emergence. Everyone wants the Sunday morning of their story. But the tradition is consistent and unsparing on this point across every form it takes. The new life does not emerge from untouched ground. It emerges from what has been specifically, deliberately laid down. The portal does not deliver the resurrection to those who bypass the death. It delivers it to those who went through the 3 days in sequence, who named what was ending, who held the threshold space, and who arrived at Sunday morning not with hope that something new might come, but with the clarity of knowing what had already died and what was already rising. If you've been at a threshold like this before, sensing that something new is trying to emerge, but feeling like something keeps pulling you back to the old pattern, I left something for you in the first pinned comment. It's for those who are ready to move through the portal completely. The second force is resurrection, and this is where the most important correction of the popular interpretation must be made. Resurrection is not aspiration. It is not the vision board. It is not the list of qualities you want to develop, the version of yourself you are working toward, the person you hope to become after enough healing, enough discipline, enough time. In the Hermetic framework, resurrection is recognition, the naming and acknowledgement of what you already are, right now, beneath the layer of what has been dying. The new identity is not constructed after the death of the old one. It is uncovered. It was always there. The death creates the space to see it clearly. There is a version of you that exists right now, not in the future, not in potential, not as a goal, that has been waiting beneath the surface of the identity you are in the process of shedding. This is the version the tradition is pointing to when it uses the language of resurrection, not the version you are trying to build, the version that is already built, that is already present in the field of what you are, that the death of the old pattern has now made legible. The statement "I am risen" is not a wish. It is not a declaration of something you are reaching toward. It is an acknowledgement of something already here, already present, already true, in the moment you claim it, with the specificity and precision the practice requires. The third force is ascension. And this is the part of the Easter template that almost no modern engagement with the holiday teaches. In the Christian liturgical calendar, the Ascension is observed 40 days after Easter Sunday. The tradition does not present the 40-day period as a waiting room between resurrection and something else. It presents it as the period in which what was resurrected becomes visible, materially present, and structurally established in the world. The risen identity, declared at dawn on Easter morning, does not become materially real the moment it is declared. It becomes materially real over 40 days of consistent alignment with what was declared. The ascension is the process by which the internal event translates into external reality. Why 40 days specifically? The number appears in enough separate traditions to warrant examination beyond coincidence. Moses on the mountain receiving the law, 40 days. The period in the wilderness before the beginning of ministry in the gospel accounts, 40 days. The post-resurrection period, 40 days. The flood in the Hebrew tradition, 40 days and 40 nights. In the numerological framework of the traditions that preserved this understanding, 40 represents a complete cycle of formation, the threshold between the completion of one stage and the establishment of the next. Not an arbitrary round number, a unit of time that the traditions identified as the minimum required for a new pattern to take root deeply enough to become self-sustaining without constant deliberate tending. Understanding the three forces changes the quality of today entirely. This is no longer a Sunday with family obligations and a nice meal. This is the specific day on which you name what is dying, acknowledge what is rising, and open the window of 40 days that makes the new identity real rather than aspirational. The question is not whether you believe in portals. The question is whether you use what this one offers. The conditions are active. The astronomical alignment is present. The collective field is concentrated. The 40-day window is opening. What you do between now and the end of this day, and in the 40 days that follow, will determine which version of this Easter you experience. The one that passes, or the one that changes the next year of your life. Before going into the specific practice, one clarification that protects the integrity of what follows. The protocol you are about to receive is not a magical ritual. It does not produce results because of symbolic power independent of your engagement with it. It produces results because it creates deliberate alignment between your internal state and the external conditions that are already active today. The astronomical forces are operating whether you engage with them or not. The collective field is present whether you participate in it or not. The 40-day growth window is opening whether you plant anything in it or not. The practice is the difference between standing still in a current and moving with it, not the difference between having access to the current and not having it. The protocol maps onto 3 specific days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, each with a distinct quality and a distinct instruction. The mystery schools treated the 3-day framework as a complete initiatory cycle, and every tradition that preserved this threshold encoded the same division: the day of severance, the day of threshold, and the day of emergence. If Good Friday and Holy Saturday have already passed for you this year, the Sunday practice, which is today, can be entered directly. But understanding what each day carries is essential to working the full cycle in future years and to understanding the specific quality of what today is asking of you. The Friday practice, what the liturgical tradition calls the Day of Passion, what the esoteric tradition calls the Day of Severance, has one function: the precise identification and deliberate release of what you are not carrying into the new cycle. Not the vague recognition that some things need to change, not the general feeling that you want to grow. The Friday practice asks for a specific name, a belief about yourself that you have been holding that has been shaping your external circumstances, an identity statement. I am someone who always falls short at the crucial moment. I am someone who cannot maintain what I build. I am someone who does not deserve the level I am reaching for. that has been running your system from below the level of deliberate thought. Name it precisely. Why write it rather than simply decide to let it go? Because the act of writing is qualitatively different from the act of thinking. Thinking happens inside the system that contains the pattern, and the pattern has access to that system. Writing requires you to extract the pattern, hold it at a distance, observe it from outside your own thinking. Every major contemplative tradition that preserved written practices, from the Egyptian temple scribes, who used inscription as a form of energetic anchoring, to the Hermetic alchemists, who wrote what was to be transformed before they transformed it, understood the act of inscription as a step outside the pattern rather than a step within it. You are not describing the belief from inside it. You are putting it on paper, which means you are momentarily outside it, observing it clearly. The tradition specifies burial rather than burning for this phase, and the distinction carries practical weight. Burning dissolves, it eliminates, it reduces what was complex to ash. Burying does something different. It places what was in your field into the earth's field, where the principle of transformation operates on it over time. What you bury becomes the substrate of new growth. This is not a spiritual metaphor tacked onto the end of an instruction. The agricultural cycle that every civilization that developed agriculture observed: seed into earth, death of the seed's outer form, emergence of new life, is the same cycle. The soil transforms what is placed in it. The paper with the pattern written on it goes into the earth as seed matter, not as refuse to be discarded. If burial in a literal sense is inaccessible to you today, a city apartment, the constraints of the afternoon, know that the gesture holds in modified form: a pot of soil, a container of earth on a balcony, the physical act of placing the paper beneath a layer of earth, however shallow, and covering it. What matters is not the depth. What matters is the deliberate physicality of the act, the engagement of the body in the release. Something in you understands, at a level beneath the analytical, what it means to put something in the ground. The body has understood this longer than the mind has had language for it. The gesture speaks to something old, and it does not require elaboration to be received. The Saturday practice, which the tradition calls the threshold space, the day the initiate spent in the liminal zone between the death of what was and the emergence of what would be, is the day the mystery schools considered the most critical and the most violated. In the Eleusinian mysteries, the longest-running and most influential initiatory tradition in the ancient Greek world, the threshold period between the death of the old identity and the emergence of the new one was treated as sacred and active, not empty. The initiation did not fill this space with activity, with planning, with review of what had just happened. They held the space. They learned to remain present in the uncertainty between what had ended and what had not yet arrived. The instruction for Saturday is largely about what not to do, and the resistance most people feel toward this instruction reveals exactly why it is necessary. Do not return to examine what you buried, not physically, not mentally. Do not spend Saturday reviewing the belief you named on Friday, asking yourself whether you really released it, wondering whether the act was effective, testing the ground by digging up the seed. Do not try to feel whether the new identity has arrived yet. Do not fill the silence with activity designed to confirm that something has changed. The compulsive need to verify is precisely the mechanism the Saturday practice is designed to interrupt. The verification impulse belongs to the old identity, the one that does not trust process without constant confirmation. What you can do on Saturday, and what the tradition of the vigilant night, the watch kept through the liminal hours, points toward, is rest in a very specific sense. Not the passive rest of exhaustion, the active rest of genuine receptivity, open, available, not reaching toward the future, not examining the past, present in the space between. The Hermetic schools called this state the posture of the initiate who has done the preparatory work, the one who has nothing left to do on Friday's terms, and who has not yet arrived at Sunday's terms. They are holding the space of pure potentiality. This is not inaction. This is the most demanding form of discipline the tradition recognized, to hold the threshold without collapsing it prematurely in either direction. Think about the night before a significant change in your life, a move, a departure, the last night before something ended. There is a specific quality to that night, a charged stillness, an awareness that something is suspended between two states. The tradition did not create this quality. It recognized it as a natural feature of threshold nights and preserved the instruction: do not waste this charged stillness on noise, let it operate. The quality of what arrives in the morning is shaped by the quality of the holding in the night before. Saturday night is the last night of the old cycle and the first night of the new one simultaneously. Its instruction is silence and genuine openness. That is all that it asks. And then Sunday, Easter, the day of declaration, not of intention, not of vision, declaration. The distinction between intention and declaration is one of the most operationally important distinctions the tradition preserved. An intention is a vector pointing toward the future. I intend to become. I intend to change. I am working toward. A declaration is a statement about the present. I am, I have, this is. The resurrection template is written entirely in the present tense. And that is not incidental. I am risen is not the statement of someone who plans to rise. It is the statement of someone who already has. The Sunday practice asks you to make that statement about your specific life, in your specific words, and to hold it as present tense truth, not future aspiration. The tradition of the Easter sunrise service, the practice of gathering at dawn to mark the resurrection, is one of the oldest continuing observances in the Christian tradition, documented in early Christian communities from at least the 2nd century. But the orientation toward dawn on the day of emergence predates that in the esoteric tradition. The Egyptian mystery schools associated the eastern horizon, the direction of sunrise, the return of light, with transformation and new life. The name most commonly associated with spring in the pre-Christian European tradition derives from a word, root, connected to dawn and the east. The sun rising on Easter morning is not a coincidence of timing. In the Hermetic reading, it is the sky completing the correspondence, new light at the physical level, corresponding to new life at the level of consciousness. Dawn on Easter Sunday is not simply a poetic backdrop to the day's events. The esoteric traditions that mapped this threshold consistently treated the specific moment of sunrise as the peak activation of the portal, not noon, not evening, dawn. This is because dawn carries a quality that no other time of day shares, the moment of maximum transition from darkness to light, from the night of potential to the day of expression. The Saturday quality, held in the dark, available, charged with the possibility of what has not yet arrived, reaches its maximum tension at the moment before dawn and releases it at the moment of sunrise. This is the energetic peak of the Easter portal, and the tradition, consistently across its many forms, understood: meet it consciously, be present at the opening. Before sunrise, or at the moment of sunrise, or as close to the first light of this day as you have access to, sit with a blank page, not a journal with existing content, a new page. The blankness is part of the practice. The empty page corresponds to the empty tomb, the space in which what had been sealed has been removed and what is new has not yet been recorded. Write in present tense, not I will. Not I want to, not I am becoming. Write, I am, I have, This is who I am right now. Name the new identity directly. Name the beliefs you are holding about yourself as of today. Name the qualities you are acknowledging as already present. Make it specific. The specificity is not supplementary to the practice. It is the practice. Write the anchor phrase that the tradition across its multiple forms converges on for this moment. I am risen. The new life begins now. These 7 words carry a structural weight that goes beyond their surface meaning. I am risen places the resurrection in the present tense and claims it as personal and immediate, not historical, not aspirational, not future. The new life begins now is a declaration of timing, not eventually, not after sufficient preparation, not when the circumstances improve. Now, on this specific morning, in this specific body, in this specific life, at this specific threshold. Write those words on the page you have prepared, then say them aloud. The vocalization completes what the inscription begins. The declaration moves from the written register into the spoken register, and both registers have been activated. What you do with the page you have written follows the inverse principle of what you did with Friday's page. Friday's paper goes into the earth, down. Sunday's paper stays with you, close but not displayed. Fold it. Keep it somewhere you will encounter it without actively seeking it, not on your desk where you will stare at it, turn it over, analyze it, look for evidence of whether it's working. Somewhere it will surface naturally, inside a book you use, in the pocket of a coat you wear. The principle is this: you are not monitoring the seed, you are staying in proximity to it while it establishes roots. Occasional encounter, not constant scrutiny. The goal is presence, not supervision. The last instruction of the Easter Sunday practice is also the most frequently overlooked and the most mechanically important. Before this day ends, take one deliberate action from the new identity. Not a large action. Not the action that will demonstrate to the world that you have changed. One small, specific, particular act that is consistent with who you wrote yourself to be this morning. A conversation you have been avoiding. A practice you committed to and have not started. A boundary you have been aware of and have not stated. A call you have not made. The action does not need to be impressive. It needs to be specific, and it needs to happen today. A declaration without embodied action remains in the register of aspiration. One act moves it into the register of reality. What will you notice in the hours after this practice? Probably not what most people imagine. The portal does not typically deliver dramatic confirmation. It does not flood you with a feeling of complete transformation, with an immediate sign that something has irrevocably changed. What you will likely notice is quieter, a slight shift in the quality of your inner weather, a sense of having settled something, a low-level awareness of having positioned yourself deliberately at a threshold rather than simply being carried through it. Some people notice that the habitual thought patterns that encode the old identity feel slightly less automatic, slightly less invisible in the 24 hours after the practice, not gone, more visible, and what you can see you can work with. The 40 days begin, starting now, starting from this moment, whether you did the complete 3-day practice or only the Sunday version. The window is open. The Ascension period, from Easter Sunday to approximately mid-May, when the traditional liturgical calendar places the Feast of the Ascension, is the period the tradition identifies as the window of visible progressive establishment of what was declared on the resurrection morning. Not a waiting period, a growth period. 40 days. And everything you do inside those 40 days either deepens the root structure of the new identity or erodes it. The tradition preserved specific knowledge about how this works, and 3 specific patterns that destroy the process before it completes. Think about a seed that has just been placed in prepared soil on a spring morning, which is, not coincidentally, exactly what April looks like from a biological perspective. In the first days after planting, the surface appears unchanged. There is nothing visible above the ground. The seed is pulling moisture from the soil, cracking open its outer shell, extending the first tentative root hairs downward. This process is real and active. It is the most critical period in the plant's development, before any external sign of it exists. If you dig up the seed to check whether it is growing, you do not get a more accurate picture of what is happening. You interrupt the process and destroy what was just beginning. The 40-day window has the same structure. The work is underground first, always underground first. The first pattern the tradition identifies as destructive to the 40-day window is what we might call premature verification, and it takes a specific form in contemporary life. It is the checking, the measuring, the looking for signs that the resurrection is real, that the declaration was valid, that something is actually different. The impulse behind this checking is not laziness or lack of faith. It is usually the same intelligence that built the old identity in the first place, the intelligence that required constant evidence to sustain its sense of reality. That intelligence does not disappear when the old identity begins to loosen. It recalibrates toward the new one and begins demanding evidence that the new one is real. And in the first 7 to 14 days, there is not yet enough visible evidence to satisfy it. The checking finds nothing. And then it concludes that nothing is growing. And the process collapses, not because it failed, but because it was interrupted. The second pattern is subtler, more common, and more immediately destructive. It is the contradiction of the planting through language, specifically through the casual, habitual use of the old identity in conversation. You wrote, "I am someone who maintains what I build on Sunday morning." And on Monday afternoon, in a conversation with a friend, you describe yourself using the language of the pattern you buried on Friday, because that language is familiar, because it has been your shorthand for years, because the social context you are in has known you as that version of yourself, and you slip back into the vocabulary of that version reflexively. In the Hermetic understanding, language is not neutral description. Language is declaration. Each time you speak the old identity into the present moment, you are re-invoking the pattern. You are contradicting the planting with every word. The practice the tradition prescribes for this is consistent across its multiple forms. Silence about the seed in its early stages. Not general silence about your life. Silence about the specific identity shift you have initiated. The alchemical texts from the Renaissance Hermetic tradition are explicit on this point. The work in its early stages should not be exposed to the external atmosphere. The reasons given are both practical and principled. Practically, the social environment has deep investments in the version of you that existed before the threshold. The people who know you have an image. When you speak the new identity to them before it has roots deep enough to sustain scrutiny, they respond through the lens of the old image, and their response, however well-intentioned, carries the weight of years of knowing you as the previous version. That atmospheric pressure is more than the young plant can withstand. The third pattern is the return to the old identity, not deliberate, not conscious. The kind of return that happens in moments of stress, pressure, challenge, when the new pattern is still shallow and the old one is still the deepest groove. The familiar path, the neural highway built by years of running the same pattern. When circumstances echo the old identity, when a situation arises that has historically triggered the old belief, the pull is not toward the new declaration. The pull is toward the familiar, toward the path of least resistance, toward the pattern that at least has the advantage of being known, even when what is known is what you are in the process of leaving behind. What does the tradition say about the return? not to treat it as evidence that the threshold failed. The return, especially in the first 2 weeks, is expected. It is documented. It appears in every serious tradition that mapped this process. The Egyptian texts describing initiatory passage, the Hermetic accounts of the alchemical work, the contemplative traditions of multiple lineages, all of them describe the old pattern resurfacing after the declaration of the new. Not as punishment, not as failure, as the specific test of whether the new identity can hold in the face of the familiar. The return is the test, not the evidence that the practice is not working. The question is not whether the old pattern returns. The question is what you do when it does. When the old pattern returns, and it will at some point in the 40 days, the practice is not resistance. Resistance is one of the killers in another form. It treats the old pattern as an opponent to be overcome, which gives it the energy of a fight. The practice is something more precise, recognition without adoption. You notice the familiar pattern activating. You name it. This is the old identity trying to run its familiar route, and you choose, in that specific moment, not to follow it to completion. Not because it is evil, not because it was wrong, but because you are now operating from a different frame, and the route it wants to take leads somewhere you are not going anymore. Recognition, then a small redirection. That is the complete practice when the return happens. What the 40 days produce, through repeated cycles of this practice, is the progressive deepening of the new root structure. Each day that you act from the new identity, the root extends further. Each day that you refuse to adopt the return when it comes, the old groove loses some of its hold. Not instantly, not on a linear trajectory. There are days in the middle of the 40 where the old pattern feels stronger than it did at the beginning, where the new one feels precarious and unconvincing. This is documented in every serious account of this process. It is not the sign of failure. It is the sign of the critical transition period, the moment when the old is releasing its deepest roots, and the new has not yet established the depth to feel stable, hold the course. The structure is forming underneath. This specific quality, the period of maximum turbulence in the early stages of a new cycle, is documented across traditions that otherwise share very little vocabulary. The Desert Fathers of the early Christian contemplative tradition described the first weeks of a new commitment as the period of most intense resistance. The Hermetic alchemists of the Renaissance wrote about the nigredo, the blackening, as the necessary first stage of the great work, the period when what was stable dissolves before the new form appears. Sufi masters documented the nafs al-amara, the lower soul's most active opposition, as occurring precisely at the threshold of genuine change. Across centuries, across traditions, the message is consistent. The most turbulence does not indicate that the work has failed. It indicates that the work has begun in earnest. In the first 7 days after Easter, the resistance will likely be most intense. The mind, recalibrating to a new set of identity statements it has not yet verified, will generate objections. The circumstances, shaped by the old identity's patterns, will continue to present experiences that echo the old story. Situations that have historically triggered the old belief will arise, often with unusual frequency in the first week. This is not the portal failing. This is the pattern that every initiatory tradition documented. The first test comes quickly. The Hermetic schools noted it. The meditation traditions noted it. The alchemical texts described it as the most volatile stage of the opus, the one that most practitioners abandoned because they mistook it for evidence that the work was not working. It was the work working. In the second and third weeks, the quality of the resistance begins to shift. It does not disappear, but it becomes recognizable rather than automatic. There is a specific transition most practitioners describe during this period. They begin catching the old pattern before it completes, rather than recognizing it afterward. Previously, the pattern would run fully, and they would notice it on the back end. Now they notice it mid-activation and have a moment of choice. This is the root structure of the new identity beginning to function. The roots are not yet deep enough to prevent the old pattern from activating, but they are deep enough to insert a moment of awareness into the activation sequence. That moment of awareness is the lever. Everything that follows builds on it. What can you expect to see by the 40th day? Not the completed version of the new identity that takes longer than 40 days to fully manifest in all external circumstances. What the 40 days produce is structural establishment. The new pattern has taken root deeply enough to have become, in some measurable way, the default. The old identity no longer requires active resistance to stay at bay. The new one no longer requires constant, deliberate intention to maintain. Something has shifted in the underlying architecture, and the 40 days are also the period during which the first genuinely new outcomes begin to appear. Outcomes that reflect the new identity making contact with possibilities that the old frame simply could not see or access. Grow in silence. This is the instruction the tradition returns to most insistently across every form it takes, and it is the one most consistently violated in an environment that rewards public declaration, documented transformation, and the performance of growth for social audiences. Growing in silence does not mean hiding that you are engaged in a process of transformation. It means not exposing the early stages of the new identity to the social atmosphere before it is structurally established enough to withstand that exposure. The fruit announces itself. Once the 40 days have produced visible outcomes, the announcement happens naturally through the changed quality of your behavior, your choices, your engagement with the world. Not through early declaration. The roots first. Then the announcement. The sequence cannot be reversed without cost. There are two kinds of people who arrive at a video like this one. The first finds it genuinely interesting, holds it in the register of possibility, and by the end of the afternoon has returned to what was already planned, without doing anything different. The pattern continues, the portal closes, the 40-day window opens, and then narrows, and then closes. And nothing was planted. The second finds it interesting and also recognizes that the information changes the quality of the day, that the specific conditions described have a logic that holds across multiple independent traditions, that the specific practices are simple enough to begin in the next hour and does something before the day ends. One deliberate act, one page written, one step taken from the declared identity. These two responses lead to genuinely different places 40 days from now. The difference between those two people will not be visible tonight. It will not be visible next week. It will be visible 40 days from now, around mid-May, when the ascension window has closed and what was or was not planted has had the time it needed to establish or not. The conditions of this specific day, the astronomical alignment, the collective field, the cosmological threshold that every serious tradition across multiple independent lineages recognized and marked, are present right now in the hours that remain. The portal is open. The window has not yet narrowed. What the tradition preserved for this specific threshold, and what you now have, is the map. The question that remains is the one only you can answer. What do you do with today? If you stayed until the end of this video, write in the comments, "Today's date then, I am risen," not as a religious declaration, as a personal one, marking the exact moment you chose to use the threshold rather than let it pass. I have placed another video on your screen right now, your next step on this path. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.